So the question is, how do I really leverage IP? How do I leverage my ideas? I have a great idea, and how do I make money out of it, and how do I create value? And the first case study is the Zumba study. So what Zumba is basically, one person had the idea of the workout I'm actually doing is a bit boring, so I rather want to have a party kind of workout. And this is quite unique. So I tried to leverage this and try to sell it to someone. So how could you do that? So imagine you're going to sports tomorrow, you have this idea of a new workout, and you think it's quite unique. You realize other people like it, which is always important to check, is there actually a market for what I'm doing? And how could you use IP to leverage this new fitness idea? You would probably register a patent, right? No. Okay, you're awake at least. So no patent. Okay, so but what could you do?
Trademark.
Trademark for the dance move?
For the dance, I was thinking the name.
No, I'm just asking in general. Could you get a copyright protection for a certain dance move? No. So probably here not, in Germany neither. I don't know any country where you could get that. Maybe the US. A trademark. Okay, and a trademark for what? For the name? Okay. To get the name, how should the trademark be constructed? Should it be aerobic dance moves? Should that be a trademark?
No.
Not distinctive enough, okay. Is Zumba distinctive enough? Yes. Which is great. So trademark protection, what else? Could you get design protection? For anything? So first you start off with the fitness, nothing else, just the idea of different fitness. Design for different moves. I think for design you need a tangible product. So just for a move, difficult to get. What you do maybe in order to get your fitness idea on the ground, you create some videos, right? Because you want to instruct people how to do it. So you would easily have copyright on that. But basically it's a product where you don't have much protection, right? Except for trademarks. Maybe. Maybe, okay. This is just really to show you there's a difference, for example, if you have trademark protection or patent protection. It's a product where you can get patent protection, you don't need to utilize that right away. The patent can sit for a few years maybe until consumers are ready to buy a product related to that. But here we have a product that doesn't have any protection besides from a trademark. And here what's really important, I think, and you can tell me your opinion, is that you use your first mover advantage. So you have this idea and you don't want to push the trademark protected theme slowly, you want to be there right away. Because everyone else could copy it, right? You have this new fitness idea, if I don't call it Zumba, if I call it something else, would I infringe the Zumba trademark or the idea? Could I copy the Zumba dance? What do you think? Yes, you can? Okay. Great, so just to the Zumba case study, yeah. So that's what I'm trying to say. With a trademark, in a way, you cannot wait. You can register the trademark and don't get your product out, but as soon as it's out, if you don't have any other protection, you kind of must use this advantage to let people know that yours is the original, because anyone can do a creative dance that is also aerobic or whatever, but you really have to show people by marketing that your product is original and nothing else. So now Zumba, this is why we come to that. So the founder had the idea of say, well, I want to exercise to energetic music, etc. The motto is ditch the workout but join the party. I want it to be joyful. I don't want it to be like a boot camp, which could be a different approach. And today it's really big, Zumba. So I just know in Germany I've never been to a class, but there's many classes. They're only called Zumba. and it's only because of trademark protection. So here we say 15 million fans take Zumba classes each week in 2,000 locations in 100 countries. That's quite big. And imagine, again, it's a product that you cannot protect per se. No copyright protection, no patent, no nothing, but it's still, if you use trademarks right, still you have a great way to leverage your idea. So just to get back to that, Zumba has a big legal team. They enforce the trademark quite properly. That's also important. You have to enforce your rights. Why? What happens if you don't enforce them? Does anyone know what rollerblades are? Yeah. Is that a product or a sport? Exactly. Very good. So in Germany, for example, what happened, everyone uses the term rollerblades. So I'm going rollerblading tonight. What happens with the rollerblade trademark if people refer to it as a mere exercise? What happens? You said diluting, yeah? Yeah. What is the function of a trademark? The function of a trademark is to distinct the origin of a product or a service from products of another entity. So if you use rollerblading, just as a general term, you lose trademark protection. That's why it's important to enforce your rights too. So here Zumba branched out in various demographics. Now they have apparel, they have video games, they have cruise ship experiences. So you go on a cruise ship on a holiday and you don't take an aerobic class with energetic music, but you take a Zumba class. Again, there's no protection besides trademark protection. And it's still in a very efficient way that you can make money. They cooperate with various fitness chains to make more money. And here really the lesson is this IP footprint is key for success. And again, I've said this a few times, it's a product that in general, per se, you cannot protect. All right, before we go to the next case study, here for a fitness training, and you register a trademark. You could register it only here in Trinidad or only in the country where you're from. You could trademark it in more jurisdictions, and you would certainly trademark it for giving fitness lessons. But then if you know your product could have success and if you believe in it, what else could you do? That's also important. If you use trademarks, always look into the future. What will I do in the next 5 years if it runs well? So ideally, you trademark it for clothing, for apparel, for many different things, and also for many different jurisdictions. And I advise many startups too. So here it's always this idea, and I always get this feedback. So I apply for a trademark now, and that costs me maybe $2,000, and I pay an attorney, and I pay the trademark fee, and what I get is only a certificate that I could put on the wall. I'd rather use the 2,000 euros or dollars to hire another trainee who does work for me. Would you agree with that attitude? It's just this lesson learned that sometimes you would think, this is now expensive, and I don't have that much money, I'm a startup, I won't register now. Can be really bad. You should get those rights, at least the main protection. All right, to the next case study. Yes, also considering if your trademark is good, if you have a good name, like Zumba is not descriptive, etc. You can also, even if it doesn't work, you could also license that in the end. So you say, my business doesn't really work, maybe I can sell the trademark, etc. But of course, there's no guarantee. But obviously, there's no guarantee. And this is what I meant with the first mover advantage. So if it's with trademarks and your product as such cannot be protected, then you need to go out and let everyone know mine is the original. That's why marketing is so important. If you go viral right away, that's perfect, obviously. And maybe could you just stress where all this information is available for startups, etc.? Could you maybe point that out?
Definitely the Ministry of Trade has a lot of information. You can Google them. Your best assistant, research and otherwise. So the Ministry of Trade has a lot of information about it. There are multiple smaller governmental agencies that can assist you with information and infrastructure. You can get literally full loans for startups, especially when you have a business plan. And usually they do require a business plan.
It's also important, if you have a brand and if you use that, you always use it in the same way. And don't, if you change branding, just really consider that, but this is just a side remark. To the next brief case study, it's great that Trinidad hosts the Commonwealth Youth Games in 2021. And I would just, since you've had these sessions yesterday, any ideas on how you could market these Commonwealth Games, depending on if you're an entity, do you manage athletes, etc. Any ideas, what would you do? Would you register trademarks? Would you need, for example, a law against ambush marketing if you're an official sponsor, etc.? So from your point of view, with whatever you're engaged in, any ideas how to market or how to react to these games?
It's a great merchandising opportunity.
Yes, indeed. So it's been said it's a great merchandising opportunity, but how could you leverage that? Could you, as we've seen yesterday for, I don't know, for public transport, make the people do 30 squats so they get a free ticket or a free cab ride, or any ideas how you could leverage this? Because the exposure itself will be so big because of this event, it would be ideal to market whatever it is that you do, naming registered, but at least a word mark and the main logo. This is what I recommend, and not only for Trinidad, but obviously for all other countries. And you would probably see that logo on any broadcast, etc. So it's quite important to have that. Ideal for government perspective, if these sports that are in the Commonwealth Games are also, let's say, supported in the community, so people can actually perform these games. They have more interest in it and are rather likely to watch any game or any sport that they actually then exercise themselves. The same would probably go for any laws related to ambush marketing or any new law that Trinidad would enact too. Yeah, so what could you do? So we've had start social media campaigns and do that right now. Provide a lot of content. So I've checked a few other sites from Commonwealth Games and there's like nothing going on really, or a few hashtags. So do that now, create content now, especially from the host as such. But also if you're a company related to that, you can use the hashtags, etc. Aside from any IP aspects related to sports, it will put the host on the map, and it can be a very good thing for the host. I remember in Germany 2006 when we had the World Cup games, many people said, this country is so friendly and everyone's so happy, so that I really was happy about that. And you should kind of do the same thing you did to me. I have a great experience in Trinidad and I really like this country. I've never been before, and this is the same experience you want everyone else to have who joins and visits these games or any other games. And obviously in relation to the games, you can advertise, as I said before, anything else you as a country or the country wants to inform the people about Carnival, about what life is like here, about your companies, about the athletes you manage, etc. So you should do all this in relation to the games, also apart from the games, but you should use this as let's say, as the catch to do more promotion.
Part of this talk today was designed specifically at NSOs to help ensure some accountability. And sports is the one area where merit should count. If you're the best, if you run fastest, you're picked. But as everyone knows, especially in the Caribbean, it's your neighbor who gets picked, or your neighbor's neighbor's neighbor who gets picked, right? And part of the talk today is about designing dispute resolution mechanisms to help ensure that the best athletes do in fact get picked. Part of this talk was designed to give some sort of best practices that could be adopted. If we say we're serious about Commonwealth Games and international games, we have to be serious about how we deal with disputes. Because when you necessarily pick a team, you necessarily exclude people from that team. Very briefly, to to sort of just talk at a very high level about when I say dispute resolution in sport, that sports law, dispute resolution in sport, it is a very unique animal, and it's very unique even among lawyers. So lawyers can't, like the idea that I could get a phone call now and argue a case by noon and we have a decision by 4 p.m., every Caribbean lawyer's mind exploded. In the sporting world, every month you lose, an athlete loses, is like a year. Right? If you think about the lifespan of an athlete, if you let a sports dispute drag on the way we've grown accustomed to letting civil litigation and criminal litigation drag on, every athlete, you never have a resolution. And I have never had a sporting case last more than 6 months. And that was a doping case at CAS. And that was the longest I've ever had a case. From the date we filed it to the date I got a decision, longest was 6 months. The shortest I've ever had a case was 4 hours. We retained at noon, and we had a decision by 4 p.m. because the Pan Am team had to be picked finally by 5 p.m. So those time frames are possible, you know. So don't let anyone fool you as an athlete or anyone that it's not possible to resolve a dispute in hours, because it is in fact quite possible to resolve it and even do appeals. We've done a trial, appeal, and an appeal to CAS in 7 days. It's possible. It's all entirely possible. And so part of the problem is lawyers being lawyers, and lawyers are never wrong. Lawyers will always tell you that the dispute is not possible, the flight has to leave, and so on. And quite frankly, it's not true. Right? There is, in fact, very, very, it's well established now. It wasn't established in the 90s, but it's well established now. Frameworks as to how we can deal with sporting disputes. And I just lay out here some of the, I call them the problems that regionally we face. And I know we like to draw from England as the example, but the English sport res in England, the UK Dispute Resolution Center actually got all of its best practices from Canada. So the Sport Dispute Resolution Center of Canada is in fact the leader in this area. And I put here a few things that have come out. Whenever you see an athlete facing a doping allegation, it's reported as a charge against them, as a charge, which that language is very loaded. It's not a charge. There's no, the DPP, there's no one prosecuting the athlete. It's an allegation. And anyone who knows a little something about sports law, you've heard about the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, it's in Lausanne, Switzerland. CAS is prohibitively expensive to appeal to, because a lot of federations, they try to enact these policies and say, look, if you have a dispute, if you disagree with us, we're never wrong, by the way. But if you disagree, you can appeal to CAS. You know, the cost for a CAS appeal is 1,000 Swiss francs is the filing fee. And to have one arbitrator hear it is 9,000 Swiss francs. So I don't know any Caribbean athlete that has 10,000 Swiss francs lying around for a team selection dispute, right? And then if the NSO is being very NSO-ish, they could say, anyone who knows me knows I censored myself with that one. They could say, no, we don't want one arbitrator, we want three, a panel of three. A panel of three will cost you 25,000 Swiss francs, plus the 1,000 filing fee. So even that is not, I don't think, a viable option for local athletes. And I put it here that perhaps we should think regionally about some sort of regional appeal body. Perhaps at the CANOC level, they seem well equipped to deal with that regionally. So what I wanted to get across is there is a need for us to embrace arbitration and mediation as a very viable mechanism. Perhaps ideally should be the first recourse to resolving any sort of sporting dispute. And I just have here team selection, funding, discipline, doping. But it goes beyond that. It goes into things like sponsorship problems, right? I mean, we were talking before, Tyrone Marcus. We were saying that, look, if you have an issue with one of your sponsors, sponsor pulls out last minute and so on, you don't want to be embarrassing them in the media publicly and so on. You know. If there's a way to resolve it privately at arbitration today for tomorrow, do it, right? So I think there is an absolute need. We can't just say things like, oh, we're signing up to good governance principles. But it's been bandied about for the past 8 months. TTOC says good governance principles. Good governance principles would demand that you had an actual written policy to deal with a dispute. So I think every NSO absolutely needs a policy to deal with disputes, and the mechanisms are mediation and arbitration to deal with it. But when we say respect natural justice, there's just generally two principles, really. It's just that if you're an athlete or the NSO, you have a right to be heard and you have a right to an impartial decision. Seems fairly simple, but we've had disputes in Trinidad, in the Caribbean, where athletes have been notified Friday evening, so they said your hearing is tomorrow. Or we won't tell you the evidence against you. When you show up at the sports complex, we'll give you the evidence against. That doesn't work. A right to an objective, impartial decision. Again, we've had situations where someone has made an allegation against an athlete and then sat on their disciplinary tribunal. I mean, oh God, I mean, you don't need to be a lawyer to know that that just smells wrong, right? So when we're designing these things and the draft policy outside, it sets out sort of the mechanics of how we respect everyone's natural justice rights, and it all can be dealt with in a timely manner. And I highlight something there. Technology is very useful in sports disputes. We don't use enough of it. Again, it's a lot of doublespeak, right? We talk about technology, you're on Facebook now, and so on. But when it actually comes time to using technology to help you resolve something meaningfully, you say, no, we can't do that. We all have to meet in Port of Spain. We have this 3 hours in traffic each way, right? No, that's why we have technology. We use the technology to resolve disputes. And mediation is, I was the biggest enemy of mediation, I'll be quite honest. I've done about a few cases in sports law, and I'll tell you that the idea that you could mediate a dispute and come to an agreement was hostile to me. I never believed in mediation. Through the years, I've become the biggest believer in it. Because especially in sports, you need to maintain that relationship. But when it comes to, but when you're an athlete and you have to go back and train with those people every day, you don't want to be the one person that had this sort of dragged out high court case or whatever it is. If it could be resolved by mediation and you preserve the relationship and you get an outcome that everyone could live with, mediate, resolve your dispute that way. And it doesn't also only apply to athletes, right? You can have mediation. A sponsor says, look, I didn't like how you all handled the last event you all threw. So I'm not really going to, you know, I know I promised $1 million, but we really don't want to do it. Instead of dragging them through high court and then making a spectacle of the whole thing, you could arbitrate. And I used to think there were things like team selection that were impossible to mediate. Half my cases get settled in team selection through mediation. So I put it there. I'm a big believer in mediation now, quite frankly. And worst case, if it fails, then you can arbitrate. And arbitration and mediation, again, the flexibility of those timelines are amazing, because if we're being serious about sport as a whole, sport is all of the pieces of it. We have to start putting all these pieces together to ensure that the athletes can succeed when they do succeed, not backwards, right? And I say that because legal is often overlooked, because for too long I've learned that athletes have found there's no recourse. They've just been told that, look, you're not on the team, if you don't like it, well, then take us high court, but we're leaving Friday. Go high court, go pay a lawyer, whatever. So that mentality needs to change, and as part of, if we do lip service to good governance principles, we also have to do lip service to the ability to resolve a dispute. You have the people who pick teams are very qualified and they're experts. Most of the time, they have justifiable reasons to not pick someone, right? I mean, you may not like it, but that's just the nature of how you select people, right? But it's the fact that if you rob an athlete completely of any dispute resolution process, then that will frustrate an athlete, especially junior athletes and parents and so on. Then they just pull their kids out. We could, in fact, produce the best. Everyone says we have the best facilities. I don't think anybody doubts that, right? We need to encourage kids, even, like I say, mediation is a big one, especially when you're dealing with parents and minors and so on. Even if you say, look, you didn't make the team, but we value you, you see, to hear an NSO say that to somebody locked in the dispute, that alone takes a lot of pressure off. So I put this there, and I still believe that we should have our own sports tribunal. Doping is weird because all appeals have to end up at CAS, and you have to pay exorbitant amounts, although they do have legal aid now. The first athlete to ever get legal aid for CAS was a Caribbean athlete. But that kind of proves the point that I think for anything but doping, we should really think collectively among the islands about a Caribbean journal. So there could be a first, the NSOs, you deal with the dispute internally. However you deal with it, maybe it's wrong, it's right, you're doing things kind of, fine. But then there's some appeal body that every athlete has the right to appeal to. And in Trinidad now, it's the TTOC that has that. But beyond that, in sports disputes, there's normally 3 levels of appeal. We could have a regional sort of body, because I know there are athletes in St. Kitts and St. Lucia and so on. They really are aggrieved because they really have no mechanism outside of, out of their court system. Right? So I put this here as sort of solutions to go forward, and I genuinely believe that we need a mechanism like this to ensure that athletes feel that if they have a grievance, at least we could deal with it. Processes like this help sort of at least bridge that gap so it doesn't get wider. That's the problem. And too many NSOs over the times, they've operated like little fiefdoms. And so there's a need to sort of bring a little discipline to that process.
Yes, thank you, Fazir. Good morning, everyone. Morning, Amir. Very provocative presentation by Amir on the issue of how we deal with dispute resolution in sport. So ahead of making some comments on Amir's presentation to stimulate the debate, I just want to step back a bit and remind us all that most competitions, local, regional, international competitions, provide for some type of dispute resolution as part of the rules of competition. So you will hardly ever find that whether as an individual or a team you enter a competition and dispute resolution is not provided for. Okay? What has happened in the history of sport is that the Olympics in particular felt that they should have an independent body, be the body that decides any issues that come up during the games. And they have eventually chosen what is commonly known as the Court of Arbitration for Sport to be that body to provide dispute resolution to the Olympic Games, and other associations and games also have their disputes go to CAS. And as Amir said, WADA uses them as the default. And so it is a bit of a double-edged sword, let's call it that. On the one hand, what they have managed to do is build a huge amount of jurisprudence in different types of disputes coming from sporting competitions, sporting bodies. And so the idea that they would have the expertise and presumably the independence tends to be very attractive to international games. On the other hand, that amount of local sensitivity, the argument we have CCJ against the Privy Council is what Amir has alluded to. Obviously as well the cost. And it is very difficult for us as Caribbean people to access the funds. We very often don't even have enough funds to run our competitions, to run our youth programs. So to then say that you are going to have CAS be the dispute resolution forum for a regional competition becomes perhaps trying to exist on a champagne budget when we have Carib money. I enjoyed a few carrot bears yesterday, and it's great to be here again. So I think what's very important is we understand that competitions provide for some type of committee to deal with disputes. And when you get your rules of competition, you should check to see, one, whether that is in there, because it should be in there, and two, who constitutes that body. Okay? If it's a schools competition, you don't want to hear that the two schools that tend to win the competition are providing 4 of the members for the committee, because you may be put at a disadvantage, or old boys, or so on. As a mechanism, dispute resolution is very attractive because it's a lot quicker, as Amir says. In fact, our previous arbitration act in Jamaica said no arbitration should go for longer than 4 months. So legislatively, the arbitrator or the arbitral panel was bound from the beginning of the arbitration to complete within 4 months. The other good thing with arbitration as a dispute resolution mechanism is you don't have the luck, or sometimes the bad luck, of going before a forum that is not familiar or that does not have expertise in your particular area. So if you're doing anti-doping, you don't want to necessarily appear before a tribunal that has no experience, who doesn't know the chemistry, who isn't going to wonder, why would you buy an over-the-counter medication from Walgreens and consume it without testing it, and so on. So the dispute resolution mechanism provides that you normally have a say in choosing who that panel is. Okay, so very often it's an unnumbered panel, and each side picks one arbitrator, and then those arbitrators together select an independent chairman. And that is the mechanism put in place to ensure, as far as possible, that there is independence in the process. So the benefit of the speed and your access to expertise is balanced by the cost. So unlike the court system, where you just have to think about paying your counsel, in the arbitration system, you have to pay for the arbitrators and the administrative process as well. So this is why CAS will take a fee at the beginning, because that entire process that is undertaken by them to complete your process is at the cost of both parties who have the dispute. Thank you, Paul. Okay, I'm going to speak very quickly on the issue of live streaming. It's come up yesterday. I think most people are aware of what live streaming is, how it relates to the potential abuse of copyright material, and then how it could be used for gain by sporting associations is what I'm going to speak very quickly on. I'm also going to refer to some legislation we have in Jamaica that deals specifically with the protection against unauthorized live streaming over these so-called Android boxes. I imagine they're probably here as well, and they're quite prevalent in Jamaica, and we've actually put an amendment in place to deal with it. All right, so we spoke yesterday about the fact that sports is hugely popular and is consumed all over the world by different means, and is best consumed live. And so the broadcasting rights which go over into live streaming really are the highest value of revenue that a sporting event, a sporting association tries to exploit. So live streaming is here. It is here to stay. The technology is very easy. It can be as straightforward as Facebook Live, which CPL utilizes now, and is probably the best commercial example for the region to see that it works. And of course, you have to have infrastructure to generate the picture. So you have to have some partner or invest in the material to be able to generate the feed, okay? And that usually is quite a challenge. In Jamaica, and I imagine in other countries in the region, we have different football properties, and the negotiation began with ESPN Caribbean to say, would you be interested in taking this feed? As most of you probably know, we used to have the direct ESPN feed, and sometime in, I think somewhere between 2006, 2008, that was stopped, and we then got a specific feed to the Caribbean called ESPN Caribbean. The issue that they had with negotiating those rights is that the quality, not so much of the feed, but of the picture, they said is not good enough. Your lighting isn't good enough. So some of the stadiums in which you're playing, when we come and we take that image, it doesn't look good enough. It was not at a standard that ESPN felt comfortable broadcasting. So there is no value to them in that. They said the fields, the grass just not green enough. It's not uniform. So it's well and good to say I have a great event, but if the consumption of that broadcasting, if the consumption of your live streaming is not at a quality that is palatable or that promotes your event, then it's not necessarily a good idea to do it. Even though, and I think over yesterday and today we established who has a right to that broadcast, okay? And so the creator of the event, the owner of the event is a creator, and that person has a right to broadcast their event, whether live or to record their event and later broadcast it or otherwise deliver it. All right, so it's very important to remember that. The owner of the event pays for the cameraman to come. Okay, and that contract should say, listen, you're doing this for a reward, for a fee, and the product you generate on your tape now belongs to me when you're done. And you deliver it to me, whether unedited, whether edited, both. All right, so the subscription TV model is where this whole beast called live streaming begins. And so because we have what is known as subscription or cable TV globally, the value to broadcasters to be able to take that event and to be able to invest in that event so that the quality of that image is fantastic, has driven a huge industry, which has become the consumption of live sporting events. But they have invested hundreds of thousands of US dollars, probably millions by now, in high-end equipment. And so when they pay for the right to broadcast your event, their position is nobody should steal that. Okay, so I think we are all familiar with the different types of live streams. You have peer-to-peer, which is a model which started by Napster, which was a music sharing website. And peer-to-peer means that the site does not store the signal. And what the site does is it makes you meet one another. So you at your home, in the privacy of your PC, have downloaded, or you are streaming the match Jamaica against Trinidad and Tobago, and you put up, hey, if you want to watch this match, click on this connection. You are sitting somewhere else, you go on the site, you see the link, you click on the link, and you get access to that other person's hard drive. Okay, so that is where the infringements and the challenges begin via a live stream. And so the challenge now is this legal or not? And there have been various challenges, most in the US, where initially peer-to-peer technology was ruled as quite lawful. It was simply a website which was connecting different people. And so the fact that they were not storing any copyright material on their hard drives or communicating it on their website was not an infringement of anybody's copyright. So this is why as an aside, you will see in a lot of these broadcasts, at various points in the matches or the competitions, the owner of that competition will put up their logo. So if you watch the English Premier League, you see the little lion head come up if it's not on for the entire match. You watch the Olympics, at some point you see the rings come up. That is the event owner's practical way of protecting their feed and being able to then identify if anybody tries to illegally take that feed or broadcast it at a later date. Because really what happens technologically is that that event is being broadcast by a signal. And this now is where most of our countries have older legislation which deal with broadcasting and what's called rediffusion. So, you know, pre-internet days, you sent a radio signal and it is diffused. The engineers would be able to explain it better than me. And then you had rediffusion where it's bounced. So the signal bounced and it eventually comes to you. And broadcasting basically is the same premise. Okay, so you have a outside broadcast truck at your event, and that truck sends up a signal which is taking the feed to either a satellite or some home network belonging to that broadcaster, which then brings it in to its facility, wherever its facility is, and then they redistribute it. And so you will find that all of our legislation speaks about broadcasting signals. And so the live stream issue, very early, the live streamer said, well, we're not broadcasting anything. We're not taking a signal from anywhere. We're not intercepting your signal. We're streaming online. This is being sent now over the internet. This is data packets. This is not a broadcasting signal. And so for a while, there was that argument that, well, how is it an infringement? But it is an infringement once you, in any unauthorized manner, distribute or otherwise exploit a copyright owner's content. So you run the risk. All right, so that is, on the one hand, the perils of live streaming in terms of how it can affect copyright owners' right to the revenue from broadcasting. On the other hand now is access to local content. So there is a lot of local content that may not be worth a TV station saying, we're going to come and invest and cover your entire event. They may send a crew and take highlights from your event. So they'll come and they stay for 15 minutes, half an hour sometimes. They take some content and they're gone. But for them to come and say, we're going to show your event live, or we're going to commit half a day, 1 day, a day and a half to be at your event, very often these days is a very challenging scenario. So live streaming now fills a gap, because assuming you have access to the equipment or you have access to an independent contractor who has their cameras, you can stream from your event and you can go on Facebook and you can stream live. You are the owner. So you own that content. Facebook isn't going to write you and say, do you have the right to stream this event? Okay? So the question then becomes, how do you monetarily get that done? But what it has allowed now in the modern world is for you to have your own ability to live stream and to effectively be your own broadcaster using the Facebook network. Okay, and this potentially is very powerful for organic growth, for grassroots sport, where we all have diasporas globally that may be very interested in paying $1, maybe paying $4 a month. The Apple subscription model, the Netflix subscription model is very prevalent. Okay, so obviously the use of earnings goes usually back into developing that event, hopefully to developing the sport. Hopefully there's a trickle down and it doesn't all stop at the level of the powers that be, who then bloat the association, and you find that the grassroots is not getting the value. And it was a huge issue heading into Cricket World Cup in 2007, where a lot of the local cricket clubs said, where is our benefit? Here is all of this money being spent to build these wonderful stadia around the region, to improve roads. A lot of our countries, government spend millions. In Jamaica, we spent, I think, 70 million US just on one stadium, which now hardly hosts cricket in Trelawney. But the clubs didn't get $1 million US. Some of them have suffered. Some of them are relegated now to the history books. Okay, so we spoke about the Caribbean Premier League. We've spoken about the fact that you have the intellectual property in your event. Okay, and so you don't need permission to then broadcast. You don't need permission to capture. Once it's your event, someone has signed up, teams have agreed to participate in your event. It's very important, either in your rules or in that registration, you have a release there that says, I have the right to capture audio-visually any content from my event, and that now belongs to me. So that's very important, because let's say you have a Masters game and Lara shows up, or one of the stars show up, and they play, and because they did something incredible, a lot of people want to see it. That person, if you didn't have that release, may turn around and say, look, I didn't know you were going to film it and sell it for reward. You didn't pay me an appearance fee. I came to help support you as a community event. Okay, so that is very important. Even though you own it, you should ensure that you have a release in there, so that anyone participating doesn't later say, but I didn't know you were going to try and put this on Facebook Live. I came to play for my team. Okay? And we've covered the fact that it is very accessible. So best approach. So usually in sports these days, if you pay to enter the venue, chances are that content is being captured by TV, okay, or in some other way. That's usually a good marker to know that there is value to the event you're attending. And that ticket you buy, usually the terms and conditions will say the owner of that event has the right to use any material coming out of this event as they see fit. So when you pay for that ticket, it's a contract, and part of that contract, normally, you don't hold them liable for any injury or damage that happens to you during the event, and you agree that when the CPL camera lines you up and you're drinking and you're having the greatest time, you can't turn around and say, you know, my image was retweeted 1 million times, and when you did the advertising calculation, you guys earned 10,000 US off my image. Where's my money? Say, you know what, we love you, here's a season pass, but you have no commercial right to come to me and say you should pay, okay?
Begin with a couple of videos just to kind of set the context for our quick conversation on ambush marketing.
This is the story of a trophy for the world. A journey. A dream. The greatest tale ever told. This is the moment when we all come together, holding our breath for what feels like forever. This is the stage where legends are made. Artists become heroes, and epic football is played. This is the place, at the center of the world, all roads leading here as the next chapter unfolds.
Besides, you know what I'm saying, there's great music by DJ Quick, Space Jam 2. Psych! Y'all know what else I'm thinking about? Cause y'all know what today is! Taco Tuesday! What is it, Bronny? It's Taco Tuesday! forgot about y'all last week. Never! Cause it's Taco. Taco Tuesday.
The first one was FIFA yesterday actually launching their logo, the emblem for the FIFA World Cup in 2022 in Qatar. The second video, for those who follow sports, that's LeBron James. And that is his Taco Tuesday. That was hard to miss. All right, not too long ago, he actually filed a trademark application in the US for Taco Tuesday. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that, because initial indications are that there were about 29 or so applications for that same Taco Tuesday over the years. Many of them are inactive, even though there seems to be one active one for someone with a franchise by the name of Taco John's, I believe it is. So this sets the context for my discussion on ambush marketing. Many of us who were here yesterday would have really gotten the big picture of, all right, so this is the logo. Like I said, was released yesterday. So before that, there would have been maybe something more generic. The interesting thing again about the Qatar 2022 World Cup is going to be happening in November and December of that year because of the climate. All right, so that's an interesting little variation. So sports IP rights owners, we've been talking about that over the last couple of days. We just had the completion of the Pan Am Games and the Parapan Games. Parapan Games, we were more successful in terms of gold medals. Akeem still doing well once again. And then in 2019, there were quite a number of sporting events. And I want for you to be looking at it through the eyes of the event organizers, the rights owners. So here we would have had the Women's World Cup in France earlier on this year, won by the USA again. We had the Vitality Netball World Cup in Liverpool, and that was won by New Zealand. I believe it was more than likely, I think it was New Zealand and Australia. They've been in the final for a number of times. Notice the title sponsor, all right, Vitality. I believe they're an insurance company. We had the England and Wales, the Cricket World Cup in England and Wales, of course, won by England, again against New Zealand. For those who followed it, really, I mean, they had to separate them by who scored more boundaries. All right, even after they went into their extra over and various things like that. So we had that this year. And then in a few weeks' time, we have the Rugby World Cup, which is going to be happening in Tokyo. So Japan is going to be hosting back-to-back major events. And sometimes that doesn't happen by accident when it comes to the hosting of major events. And then this was interesting because it was the first time I'm aware of that the International Olympic Committee awarded 2 Olympic Games at the same time. FIFA did that for Russia 2018 and for Qatar 2022. The IOC did it for Paris 2024 and Los Angeles 2028. And as has been mentioned, has been part of the discussion, the logos, the registration of trademarks, because these become important for branding purposes, for merchandising purposes, for monetization. So we've been talking about the value of the sports business industry, multi-billion dollars, 4 main revenue streams, generally speaking. My discussion on ambush marketing is going to center predominantly on one of them. Okay? Some of you all may know that Amazon has gotten into the broadcast rights industry. All right? And for this premiership season, they have the rights to broadcast 20 of the games. Now, for the longest while, Sky Sports and BT, they have dominated the Premier League market, £4.5 billion for 160 matches throughout the season. Amazon has gotten in there for £1 billion to get 20 of their matches broadcast. So I want to use this expression, anti-infringement programs, AIP. The AIP is very important for an event host because, as I mentioned, 4 major revenue streams: merchandising, ticket sales, broadcasting rights, sponsorship. Especially when it comes to the investment of sponsors, the anti-infringement program is very important. At the heart of sports sponsorship is exclusivity. And this really started to take more shape around 1984 in the context of the Olympics, when the Olympics were held in Los Angeles. Before Los Angeles, you had multiple sponsors. all right? Maybe looking like a Formula One vehicle, for instance. Okay? If I'm not mistaken, Montreal Olympics 1976, when Hasty Crawford won his gold medal, I believe there were over 60 different sponsors attached to the Olympics. So it was the Los Angeles Olympics that really birthed the idea of sponsorship exclusivity. And when that turned out to be a financially viable plan, then that really became the model for sports sponsorship going forward. And I think Paul mentioned the Olympic program yesterday. What does ambush marketing do? It damages that exclusivity. As a sponsor, I'm saying I'm going to invest X millions of dollars because I know in this particular product category, whether it is, drinks, whether it is, media, whether it is techno, whatever the product category is, I am paying for exclusivity. So nobody else, no competitor, anybody else should be able to enter this particular space because I've paid for it. And the common thread with the event hosts is they're saying, we need this money to be able to put on the event. And that's where the idea of the anti-infringement program comes in. So the International Olympic Committee, how does it define ambush marketing? It's an attempt by an individual or entity to create an unauthorized or false association, whether it's commercial or not, with the Olympic Games, the Olympic movement, the IOC, the National Olympic Committee of the host country, or the organizing committee of the Olympic Games. What does it do? It interferes with the legitimate contractual rights of the official marketing partners of the Olympic Games. So London 2012, the Olympics being held in London, and these florists decide, I need to get some people to pass through. So out of tissue, they make these 5 Olympic rings. Out of tissue, they make the Olympic torch. And this is a newspaper clipping. Take those rings down, florist falls foul of ban on Games logo. So back in 2006, just after, in fact, the London Olympics were awarded in July 2005, and within weeks of London winning those games, legislation was already passed. All right, the London Olympic Games and Paralympic Games Act. And what it would have done, it would have outlawed any type of association with the games. Okay, so this is creative, it's clever, but it's unauthorized. And so 1996, Atlanta Olympics, that's where Otto Bolden gets his double bronze. The footwear sponsor for the Atlanta Olympics is Reebok. Guys, take a look at Linford Christie's eyes. What do you see? It's a Puma. Do you think Puma was an official sponsor? Of course not. Reebok is the footwear sponsor. Linford Christie won the gold medal in Barcelona in 1992 for the 100 meters. That's the marquee event of the Olympics. So Puma decides, you know what? He is going to be interviewed. So here's a good way for us to get some global branding. Let's put some Puma contact lenses in his eyes. So when he sits down before the cameras, globally, Puma gets exposure without having to pay 1 cent. All right? So Tokyo Olympics is coming up. And what the IOC has done, they've asked the organizing committees to just produce these branding guidelines, etc., so that people can understand what is to be protected. So this is the logo, all right? And in their branding guidelines, emblems and names associated with the Olympic and Paralympic Games and other intellectual property. The IOC makes this very clear that the exclusive property of the International Olympic Committee and the International Paralympic Committee, and the management of this IP has been entrusted to the organizing committee. The intellectual property belongs to us. It's our exclusive property. Any use of it has to pass through us. And they go on to define it. They said, this is ambush marketing, the unauthorized use, abuse, or misappropriation of marks associated with the games. This not only infringes with the IP of the IOC and the IPC, but results in a reduction of sponsorship funds. If sponsors pay a lot of money and then rivals are able to come for free and get exposure, then the sponsors say, I'm not going to invest anymore. I might as well ambush. All right, and this is some further on it.
It can happen like this. So if you're a sports agent, it can happen that you have to do everything for your athlete. And we're discussing the role of the manager as well. I'm not sure if you know these 2 guys. So one on the left is Ibrahimovic, the soccer player. Do you know the guy on the right? No, never seen. That's Mino Raiola. That's his agent. He's one of the most famous agents. I actually handled a case against him. Talking about another case, so I can do that. Allegedly, the way Ibrahimovic got to him was he called his office and say, "Hi, this is Ibrahimovic. Be my manager and call me back." And the response of Mino Raiola, the way he is, he's kind of like a mafiosi, you could say, was basically in words I will not express here, because I already made some mistakes, was basically, no, tell him I'm the agent, he's supposed to call me, otherwise tell him to go somewhere else in a different way. So Ibrahimovic said, okay, he must be really good if he's that confident. Let's meet him. So they met in a restaurant. Ibrahimovic was dressing up in a tie and in a suit and everything. And this guy came in his sweatpants and said like, well, I represent you because everyone else will not get you the money. And since they have an alliance. So what I want to tell you with is, as a player agent, can be both ways. It can be you really do everything for the client, or you're a bit stricter maybe. And what is important, or the first part that's important, you have to know your athlete. You have to know what your athlete's about. You have to know the characteristics. Would you say, I assume you know both these sportsmen, right? So you see Roger Federer and Anna Kournikova. And Anna Kournikova, what is she famous for? Does anyone know? Tennis? Very good. Very sharp skills on seeing that. But what is she really famous for? Does anyone play poker? No one plays poker. Okay, so in poker, if you Texas Hold'em, your first hand is an ace and a king, it looks really good because you have an ace, but most of the time you still lose. It's a bit like Anna Kournikova. That's why you call this hand Anna Kournikova. A and K, looks good but never wins. So what I want to say with this is you have to know your client, you have to know your athlete. So on the left side, Roger Federer, how would you describe him? He's like obviously a very good tennis player, that's clear, but he's more of a guy without scandals, like quite clean, quite... So you need to have this characteristics, sorry. You need to emphasize these characteristics. Anna Kournikova, you could say, well, she's famous for that. And then you have other athletes, like Dennis Rodman, for example, who are a bit more, let's say, outgoing than Roger Federer. So also, if you manage that client, maybe different brands are important than to Roger Federer. Could you imagine Dennis Rodman being a brand ambassador for Rolex? Maybe not as much as for Nike or another brand. And then you have players like him. Do you know him? Mario Balotelli. So I also had a case involved with him. And here you see him having his jersey over his head after one goal, and it says, the t-shirt below says, "Why always me?" Because he thinks he's always this poor person that always gets bad reputation. That bad reputation maybe comes from stories like, in the first half of an important soccer match, he receives the yellow card. His coach goes to him and says, whatever you do, don't get off the field. You cannot get a red card. Minute 46 of the game, he gets a red card. Goes off the game. Here, why I put a Lamborghini next to him, the story is, he wants to visit a friend driving this Lamborghini, has no clue how to get to his friend, so he orders a cab and tells the cab driver, please drive all the way there and I'll follow you. So, for one, this is a funny story, but two, this is also how athletes can be, especially if you manage them. There are some athletes that would get to the hotel room and call you as an agent and say, where's my PlayStation? How do I get food? How do I get a shirt or a tuxedo for this event in the evening? So just to take into account what you actually have to do for your client, you have to know your athlete, and I cannot emphasize that enough. So my suggestions would be, you need to know your athlete. You have to emphasize this unique character. If Dennis Rodman is a bad boy, focus on a brand that helps him. Make himself a brand. Leverage this unique character, right? Written agreements, then establish an IP portfolio, obviously. For an agent, it's perfect. Just register trademarks for the athlete. If you're fair, you register the trademarks on the athlete's name, not on yourself. Yeah, as I said, help the athlete become his own brand. And managing the athlete may not be enough, so just be aware, maybe you have to tackle different issues. Maybe you, to some extent, need people that are his personal assistant, because some athletes, which is okay, only focus on the sports, and the rest is difficult to handle. If they can't navigate where to find their friends, then they need to order a cab. Maybe other issues come with that as well.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. After lunch on the second day, and I hear people getting tired of me. I'm not as pretty as Brian Lara when I play the cover drive, so I'm going to try and speed it up. I did try to play cricket. Why the crowd is so important is we were at a club out of Kingston, and I think I was 12th man. And someone came off the field, and I ran on the field. And someone in the crowd said, Jesus Christ, the Stars are away playing regional cricket, and he still can't make the 11. And I knew at that moment that I could forget a career in cricket, because whoever said that was absolutely right. I just couldn't make the 11. I wasn't good enough. So it's really important to play with fans at the stadium or at the cricket field. It's critical. Tells you a lot. You learn a lot from the experience. You get used to heckling. Why were the Australians so good? They slag us. And until we got used to it and understood and gave it back, then we got backbone, right? So I wanted to quickly cover this because Professor Farkas, thank you very much. A very pleasant German. And we hope to have you in Kingston at some point. Absolutely. I tell you, we have a huge respect for your people, and mainly through your football prowess. You have a lot of fans in the West Indies of your team. So let me see if I can navigate this. We had a quick discussion after my presentation earlier, and I wanted to look at the terms and conditions quickly of Instagram. Paul, if you just allow me, because I made a rather dramatic statement that you give up all your rights, and that was too dramatic, okay? So I want to get to the terms and conditions so that you can see what it is you give up, okay? You still retain the ownership in your photo as the person who has created it. All right, but what you do give to Instagram is a non-exclusive worldwide license to use that image. So when you share it, you allow them to publish it all over the world, whether through the internet or any other way they wish to. Okay, so I would thank you. Let's see if I can go down to 3 very quickly. Is it, or is it 2? Right, Instagram claims it does not take ownership of its users' content, but the terms state that the user grants Instagram a non-exclusive, fully paid and royalty-free, transferable, sub-licensable, worldwide license to use their content. So that basically means we are a co-owner in terms of the publishing of your content, okay? And I wanted to make that point. So, okay. So sports as a business, and we've been speaking over the past couple of days of how IP brings value to sport. That page is fine. How IP brings value to sport, and how, as mostly amateur associations, you're going to become commercialized, and you're going to commercialize the properties that you have. So I suppose one of the freakish facts of the Olympics is that effectively the Olympics is an amateur competition, right? Even though you have professional athletes that represent their countries, in and of itself, they don't perform to be paid. The prize is a medal and the honor and distinction of coming first at the Olympics, but you're not paid for it. Yet the Olympics very much are organized as a commercial operation. So the IP assets of whatever you do is what you're trying to use to drive value, okay? And usually, in our context, it's sponsorship dollars. Most of our competitions or associations, you're able to find 1, 2, maybe 3 sponsors, companies that for whatever reason the person used to play your sport, or they have a child who is very promising, or they support a school that's a leader in that particular sport. And they say, let me support the national competition. All right? And that now is getting you to deriving value from your IP, because that sponsor wants protection. All right, so we will examine protection of IP assets. And I think we've covered it. I'm not going to stay very long on what is an IP asset. There are image rights. We spoke about it earlier, the Ataboldan example. We have had in Jamaica a precedent established through the abuse of Bob Marley's photo on commercial merchandise. And it was the first time in Jamaica that the property right in your personality was tested. And what the Jamaican court found is that as a celebrity, you do have the commercial right to exploit your image. Okay? And so that is what, in Jamaica and in common law, once you can establish that you are a recognizable celebrity, you can then say, hey, I should have the right to commercially exploit my image. Okay? And that is what is known as image rights. So once athletes start to get on a national stage, an international stage, they can then make the case that, look, I'm now becoming enough of a celebrity that I should have the right to exploit my image right. Teams that these athletes will play for will say, we are the ones who are creating this value. And that was a lot of the arbitration between the West Indies Players Association and the West Indies Cricket Board was around image rights. Okay, so team versus individual is an interesting discussion as well. And so for the individual, you have their image, their face, sometimes a particular pose. With the uniforms now, you have the sponsor's brand. And what has developed, particularly in football, is there is an almost immovable connection between the team you support, their crest, their name, and the brand of that sponsor. It's almost impossible to separate Chelsea FC from Samsung. For so many years, Samsung sponsored them. Fly Emirates with PSG in France, Real Madrid, Arsenal. If I call different jerseys, people will tell me who they are, okay? So in terms of developing as a business, as an individual, as an athlete, it's image rights. And the other critical thing is your conduct. And Thomas spoke to it earlier, right before me, using Dennis Rodman as a great example. Rodman gave an interview last year on CNN claiming that he's who put President Trump to meet with Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un insisted he should travel on that first trip and so on. I don't know if anybody remembered that he had a hat on, a cap, baseball cap, and it was, I think, a cryptocurrency for cannabis. Okay, and the value of that brand for that 7 or 8 minutes, I mean, it was quite amazing saying I didn't ask him to take it off, but the value that brand got in terms of the exposure to however many times that broadcast was repeated globally, is hard to derive. But I'm sure Rodman either has equity in that company or gave them a nice 6-figure number to say, I'm going to promote you for the next 12 months. This is how I do it. So it's important, Mr. Aberdeen Sport Management, have your athletes understand they need to remain disciplined. All the associations. Because once you step out of line, brands don't wish you anymore. That's it. They, when you start, are looking at the value they are giving to you. They don't see you giving them much value. They're taking a bet on you. Okay, so you have to toe the line. We spoke already about the unique ability of sport to create emotional attachment, and I don't think this is not the audience that I need to convince about that. So let's look at some examples of celebrities and image rights. David Beckham has arguably made hundreds of millions of dollars directly through his career as a professional football player, and indirectly through the use of his image rights. He Yesterday we saw a photo with him with H&M, representing some clothes. He, I think, had represented Calvin Klein, cologne, you name the type of fashion item, and Beckham somewhere along the line has had a product that he has associated his image with to great commercial effect. He's now taking the next step, which is setting up a franchise in Florida, trying to set up Miami FC and having a challenge with his site. So Beckham is there, Drogba is there, Kylian Mbappe is another amazing example. Neymar in Brazil. Literally every product category you can think of, one or the other leading brand, Neymar has an endorsement deal. So sometimes you see again, at the stage he is in his career, a certain sense of entitlement that is part of what drives it. Okay? And we had during the London 2012 games, Adidas had an activation. And an activation is when a brand uses a non-conventional method of trying to be cool or trying to engage people who are not necessarily consumers of that brand already. Okay, and so Instagram is used now. We had the Wendy's example earlier. And what they did is they set up a photo booth. And you're passing, they say, hey, come in here. And you can take a picture with Beckham, okay? So the power now is in the name and the symbols and the association. And I think we've gone over and understand that the intellectual property and the value of that intellectual property is when you connect it to some form of registrable property. So in terms of image rights for athletes, where they maximize the value of their intellectual property is when they have a sponsor, when Bolt signs with Puma, or when Bolt signs with Digicel, and Digicel says, okay, we're going to cover these costs. So he and his team no longer have to worry about getting to games, uniform, nutrition, all of these things. And as he progresses as an athlete, then you can start to get into the concept of, okay, it's not just support anymore. The reality in the Caribbean is most sponsorship is about support. It's not about making money. And I would say perhaps for the first 4 or 5 years of any athlete's, let's say semi-professional, professional life, it's about living. It's about getting by there. And so what you find is different leagues globally, for example, Champions League and others have one official supplier in different categories. Okay, it's very effective. Heineken is in your brain with the Champions League. The anthem of Champions League, you start to hear it in your head, you sing the Heineken bottle because of how they advertise it, okay? And that is a huge connection that I'm sure UEFA will say to Heineken, you can never pay us enough money for the value that creates. UEFA is able to bill Heineken probably for millions of euro over a number of years because they protect that association so well. So you will never go to a Champions League match and be able to buy Budweiser. Okay, and we spoke earlier about the sunset legislation protecting games and so on. One of the things you will find when you bid for global games is they will say, look, our official suppliers are the only products that can be in the games. And they will even put a ring, maybe a mile and a half from that stadium that no competitors can, their advertising cannot exist. So in Jamaica, for example, for Cricket World Cup, ads had to be painted out for that blackout period within a mile of Sabina Park. And you can't bring Coke if it was Pepsi, you can't bring Carib if it was Red Stripe. I don't think it was Red Stripe, I can't remember.
So today my topic is going to look at bringing grassroots sports coverage to the public. So yes, it's about us getting coverage of grassroots sports, but not just that. How do we do it in a sustainable way? So unlike the other presentations, I'm going to do a little bit of a business plan, a business pitch to try and save grassroots football in Trinidad. right? And the reason I say save grassroots football, and this is where my referee experience comes in. So when we think about football in Trinidad, the big elephant in the room, we don't have professional football in Trinidad. I can't think of one player in Trinidad who is a professional athlete by definition, i.e., they play football and they don't work, but they make a sustainable living from playing football. We don't have that here. We have semi-pro players at best, meaning they get a match fee for the day they play, they might get some help with training expenses, etc. But beyond that, they have a regular job. They have to go to work. Yeah, they have to go to work, right? So what is the football structure in Trinidad? Right? And this is where we see it in. So our highest level, the Pro League, which actually up to not too long ago, we didn't know if it was going to happen this year or not. Apparently they did get some financing, so it will go ahead. But what about the Super League? The Super League is at this state not going ahead. The clubs are unsure what is going to happen. They don't know if they'll be playing football in a couple months' time. What we do have going on right now is a hybrid league called the Ascension League, which got a private sponsor from the US. And the competition structure was to include all of the Pro League teams with the Super League teams. Right? So they're playing what is in essence a glorified friendly competition for trophy, for match fees. Right? But this is our so-called organized football. What about the rest of football in Trinidad? And Mr. Kanta Singh talked about it in context of cricket yesterday. What are we doing for the lower divisions, for the grassroots? And this is where actually all the players come from. The zonal leagues, the private leagues. This is a feeder system that makes sports in Trinidad work. So how can we help these entities out to produce better athletes, to produce more athletes and actually get the overall sporting system off the ground? So the question is, how do we make leagues like this sustainable, not just for the athletes to play football or for the clubs to ply their trade, but also for all the other stakeholders involved? It's not just about the footballers, it's also about the employees, the athletes, everyone else, right? So it's about sustaining the football structure. So what's the state of football in Trinidad and Tobago? If you read the newspapers, there's always something in the newspaper about Trinidad and Tobago Football Association, always something about David John Williams. Whether it's positive or negative, the question is, well, how does this affect the state of football and how does this affect the overall system of football, not just in Trinidad, but the Caribbean? Right, so administrative woes and alleged impropriety, right? So we're dealing with things like financial problems, lack of transparency, lack of accountability, even just, I don't want to go too much into the politics of it, but, the impropriety that comes with the structure of football. Right, so that's a big turnoff to investors. That's a huge turnoff to sponsors. Who wants to get involved into something that you're not entirely sure where your investment is going to go, what you're actually going to get out of it at the end of the day? Financial uncertainty. As I said with the Pro League, we weren't sure if the Pro League was going to start. We don't know if the Super League is going to start. The Super League is still owing referee fees from the 2012 and 2016 seasons, I believe. We have some of the zones owing money, like the North Zone being owed money from last season's services, right? So there's also this financial uncertainty. That's along with the financial uncertainty. And then with no referees, how can we play sport, right? So it's about making sports sustainable for everyone. So what is the discussion today about? What's the proposal going to be about? Well, I am told that the effective use of copyright law can make grassroots football prosperous, yes, but also self-sustainable. We should not be reliant on government money to run our sports leagues. And we have the means, we have the laws, we have the infrastructure to facilitate all of this. So the plan, what am I proposing we do? So the first part of the plan, we need to start broadcasting our games, whatever type of game it is, whatever sport, at the grassroots level or further up, on the internet. We don't need to rely on big media. We don't need to rely on, the newspapers or the television stations, etc., to get our content out there. There are lots of internet platforms, both free and paid, that we can take advantage of, right? And by doing this, we create a number of different types of opportunities. So advertising opportunities comes outright to us, physical and internet advertising, right? What will this do? It will create and raise the profile of domestic grassroots football. It creates exposure for the clubs, the players, the brand of football, or whatever else. And very, very controversially, and I'll come back to this at the end, I'm going to promote a gambling-based model. As opposed to subscription-based models that we've been looking at recently, I'm going to propose a gambling-based model. Right. So, in terms of revenue generation, what can we do using the broadcast, and how are we going to make money from it? Well, I've identified these areas as a way of making money. Physical advertising to start with. If a sponsor knows that the event they're sponsoring is going to be broadcasted internationally or broadcasted on the internet, i.e. accessible by many people, what are they going to do? They'll want to put signage in, right? So they know they're getting more bang for their buck here. So physical advertising remains the case. What about website advertising, right? So you click on YouTube and you see ads on the side, you see ads scrolling on the screen, you see text wraps coming out on the screen as well. So there's also a whole new avenue of website advertising, right? It might be Google-based, i.e. Google revenue ads, or it might be you operating your own website and introducing your own digital ads, right? And this ties in with the sponsorship. So sponsors are now more likely to come on board because they know they're going to get more reach for their product. Yeah? I'll come back to gambling levies and taxes after. If we know that there's more money in the game, this normally means better competition, better equipment, better standards of play, and this raises the quality of the competition. It creates more competitiveness in the industry. People are more likely to want to watch better football, better cricket, better rugby, and money is really the catalyst driving that. The more money is at play, people play harder. That's just the facts of life. It's the reality, right? We all like to think that, football is a purest sport or cricket is a purest sport. But, bigger prizes, bigger stakes, harder play. That's the reality, right? If we have better play, better competition, then gate receipts also go up. Filled stadiums are always better than an empty stadium. Also pays for infrastructural costs, etc. Merchandising. If you have a good competition, good teams, yesterday, I'm not going to repeat it, we looked at it with Mr. Watson, selling, CPL jerseys, etc. It creates all additional revenue streams, right? All of this money adds up. But I don't think this is going to be enough. Right? And this is where I'm going to talk about gambling levies and taxes. If gambling websites, etc., get involved, the money that it comes into the sport can increase, whether it's through direct sponsorship or through backline means of money trickling back down into the competition, like in the Irish League, where they pay upfront fees for the broadcasting of football. So on gambling websites like Bet365, you can get access to Trinidad football in a very limited supply. Right, so we can gamble on Pro League games and Ascension League games on Bet365, right? So why not sell them the rights to the broadcast? You're commodifying the broadcast, selling that to them, and then they give you money, right? So it creates a sustainable development model that money can come in, and then you take that money and invest it in the rest of the setup. So, I know what I'm proposing is very different and very significant because we don't tend to think about gambling as a progressive way forward, but in terms of what we're facing in the Caribbean, what we're facing in Trinidad, I think a gambling-based model is something that might be feasible, right? It would allow for an immediate injection of finances into our much-needed, or rather lacking sports setup currently, right? So, legal infrastructure, the laws are there, as I said. We have the communication to the public, right? It's there. We know what it's, we have a fairly good idea what it's about, what it can protect, and how it should be used. That's no problem there. I don't see the law being a problem here. Where we do have problems with the gambling laws, we'd have to open up our gambling laws a little bit, but that's a separate discussion aside. Startup costs. What do we need to outlay this? People have camera equipment and internet connections that are, as we discussed today, very, very useful. Not that expensive. We don't need Sportsmax quality equipment necessarily. You can actually push the cost off to the gambling investors, let them take care of all the infrastructural stuff. We have all the football stadiums there, though, again, we know that they're a little bit of disrepair if anyone's been to any of the stadia recently, right? But the infrastructure is there. We have the physical infrastructure. It's really just, well, how do we convince someone to invest their money? Yeah? And this comes with the administration integrity bit. We need to clean up our sporting context, right? So we need more accountability, more transparency. The real issue here is, well, there's no easy way to fix this, but making steps in the right direction will go a long way in helping everyone involved. And then I think the biggest point is the moral dilemmas. Do we want to base our sports based on gambling, right? So it's a difficult question to answer. I don't necessarily have a strong viewpoint on gambling being wrong, morally wrong per se, but it's something that we could think about. Also, do we want to encourage gambling on children's football? Absolutely not. We're not going to gamble on the intercall, right? Or at least allow legal gambling, though it happens anyway, right? So there are moral issues involved here. But what I'm proposing overall is that copyright law can be the driving factor to restore the prosperity to our football leagues. We've had many successful athletes come out of our grassroots system, but that has failed in recent years. And the real reason that I see it being a troop on the ground on a Saturday and a Sunday running in the savannah is that we don't take the time or the care to nurture them from grassroots upwards. So there's a disconnect between the grassroots level and the higher level. And by putting some sort of formal infrastructure in place, driven by copyright and broadcasting, we can start that process and hopefully make sports sustainable in the Trinidad, in the Commonwealth Caribbean, and then moreover, let that pay some dividends and hopefully we get to another World Cup in football or, continue our success at the Cricket World Cup, T20, that kind of thing, right? And also grow other sports. Allow people to, witness other sports, yeah? So with that, that concludes my presentation. And
So good afternoon, everyone. I was like, I'll talk about Rule 40, because that's something that's very pertinent with regards to sponsorship, finance, and the global perspective with the Olympic movement and so on. Right, so over the last 2 days, we've been discussing intellectual property and how that underpins all the commercial and financial aspects of sports, right? And that's why, again, events like this is so important. A lot of our NGBs would, I don't want to use the word cry, they would complain that, we don't have enough finance in sport. A lot of it is funded by the government. But I think it's also critical, again, interventions like these, for them to understand what are some of the key things they need to look at. And I think getting a better understanding of intellectual property is going to assist in that vein. So the IOC, right, I think is a good example of an entity who understands the strength of their brand, the need to protect their intellectual property in terms of the rings and everything associated with Olympism and the Olympic movement. And this is how, as I was saying, I think they're a very good example of how this should be treated. So while the IOC encourages the support and growth of the Olympic movement through the NOCs, right? NOCs being National Olympic Committee, so in our situation it will be the TTOC. There are certain protections that they give to the rings, to the Olympic movement, that on one hand is very important for them to protect the integrity, but on the other hand, it could be a bit restrictive to a wider group or a different group of athletes and entities, and that is what we're going to talk about today. Right, so as I mentioned, I was in Peru last month for the Pan Am Games, so I was having a conversation with Olympic sailor Andrew Lewis and his colleague from El Salvador, Kike, right? So we're just talking about generally finance associated with doing a good campaign for the Olympics. So, sailing in Trinidad and Tobago is still not very mainstream. I know a lot of people may have followed Andrew's journey because it's really been a story. But in terms of just giving you all some background, it is very expensive, right? Sailing in particular. One, it's not one of those mainstream sports. So, you have to work extra hard to get the funding. I think Kike asked about activating Junior Olympics. And Andrew, because he had that conversation, that experience, activating Junior Olympics and the blackout period, he's like, no. He said there's something called Rule 40, right? Rule 40.3 to be exact, where you need to adhere to as an Olympic athlete or Olympic team, or else you could get in a lot of trouble. That we almost got in some trouble too back in 2012. And basically, what we're going to discuss is the challenges associated with sponsors aligning with Olympic athletes during that period of the Olympics, right? In addition to which, all of the things that the IOC has done to protect, again, as I said, protect the integrity of the rings, and how restrictive it is for the athletes now to give that value to the sponsors who may have followed their journey. So we're going to discuss this now. So what is Rule 40.3, right? In the interest of time, I'll just jump straight to the clause that is the most pertinent. Except as permitted by the IOC Executive Board, no competitor, team official, or other team personnel who participates in the Olympic Games may allow his person, name, picture, or sport performances to be used for advertising purposes during the Olympic Games. In addition to this, you are forbidden to use anything associated with the Olympics, right? So they have a listing of restricted words, right? You can't say, during that period, you cannot say summer games. You can't say, if you're looking at Rio, you can't say road to Rio. You can't say Rio 2016. You can't say Olympics. You can't say Olympian. You can't say gold medal. You can't say podium, and a host of other things, right? So this sort of thing, as an Olympic athlete, and even advertisers need to know what they can and can't do, even if they have an athlete that they may have sponsored prior. You can't use those words together. So my dear colleague, Council Marcus, spoke earlier about ambush marketing and the need to protect that, right? So brands are creative in their pursuit of association with athletes and teams without paying the fees for that association. So Sean mentioned that he's fully in favor of it, but that will have some repercussions. Rule 40.3 and the blackout period, they are meant to preserve the integrity of the Olympic partner program during the games. Right? So basically, what is the Olympic partner program? It's the worldwide sponsorship program managed by the IOC. It provides each worldwide Olympic partner with exclusive global marketing rights and opportunities within a designated product or service category, right? So basically, there are 11 sponsors who are paying big money to have their brand associated with those Olympic rings. And the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, needs to protect that association because these entities are paying a hefty sum. I don't know if you're able to see here some of the Olympic partners, the 13, Olympic partners. We have Samsung, Toyota, Visa, Panasonic, General Electric, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble. What do these Olympic partners provide? Some will provide direct support for training and development of Olympic athletes. Some will provide global marketing campaigns. Some will provide essential services for athletes participating. So generally, they're all set up to provide value, to add value to those stakeholders that fall under the Olympic movement. And then we see here in terms of numbers, why is that so critical? So I think we've all gained an appreciation of the importance of broadcast in the whole sports ecosystem. We know that broadcast rights is what drives sport and what provides this finance for a lot of sport to happen. But here, in terms of sources of revenue for the Olympic Committee, we could see that the Olympic program represents just about 18 to 20% of all of the revenue that is. But this is where the discussion arises. A lot of the money and the operations of the different NOCs is focused on developmental. Grassroots, as Dr. Koo spoke about, if it's rugby, if it's swimming, if it's basketball, developmental stuff and assisting athletes to go through the ranks. Again, in the discussions over the last 2 days, I think we all appreciate the need for value exchange when it comes to corporate and athlete brands. Corporate brands, outside of their corporate social responsibility policies, often see sporting properties as investments, right? As a result of this, there have been a lot of challenges to the rule, right? In my research for the presentation and chatting with Council Marcus prior, it went back to 2012, where Sanya Richards-Ross, right, after the 2012 Olympics, I think she won 2 gold medals, she came back and she started to raise her voice against the rule, because what she was claiming, or not claiming, but bringing to the fore, was that there are a lot of Olympic athletes who have to, instead of taking their time to train morning and evening and getting necessary rest, they need to still have 2 and 3 jobs to finance their Olympic dreams. And now, on top of that, they are unable to have access or provide value to their sponsors because of what could be seen as the overly oppressive and IOC Rule 40.3. That Rule 40, as it stands, is too far-reaching and abusive conduct. So, after all of the pressure, In June 2019, the IOC Legal Commission proposed some changes to Rule 40.3. Right, so I was reading insidethegames.biz, which is a good website to follow, get some good information. They're going to change the bylaw to read competitors, team officials, and other team personnel who participate in the Olympic Games may allow their person name, picture, or sports performances to be used for advertising purposes during the Olympic Games in accordance with the principles determined by the IOC Executive Board. Right, so this amendment has been sent out to different Olympic committees, and they are now going to provide feedback to the IOC to determine how they're going to implement it based on the amendment. So generally, there is a move now towards creating some balance with protecting the IOC's intellectual property and the brand, because as I mentioned earlier, it really helps drive sport at a global level. But we also have a situation where you're encouraging all of these athletes to strive for Olympic greatness, and they're going to be paupers. It don't make sense. People just stop and say, at some point in time, I want to start a family, and so on and so forth. In our Caribbean experience, right, we could see why athletes need to be given more of an opportunity to leverage their brand. As Sir Regis mentioned, I work sport company. I have my colleague, Mr. Creed, in the office. So we know about the challenges in terms of being able to provide finance for athletes who are going, along this road for Olympic qualification. It is difficult. So the athletes need to have a fighting chance, basically, right? In addition, our athletes perform well at the Olympics, right? So let us be in a position where we could better exploit these performances so that, it could be sustaining.
Wanted to thank everyone for coming out, especially
Yeah, we're going to do it from the very end.
this youngster here who had a lot of really, I don't know if you're a social influencer, these fancy terms, or you call it the Instagram crowd. But this was 2 years in organizing and trying to have a workshop to really look at the issues that confront us in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. And we just came out from Carifesta where we actually, in my humble view, actually perfected how to create a buzz on an event by having all the agencies partner together. And I think we're stronger in partnerships. One body can't do it alone. So partnering with Sport TT to try to create this think tank from the ground up to get recommendations that will feed into the national sporting policy, and that's what we have on the board, is critical, because we have a sport policy and we have an elite athlete program. Many countries I think a few countries in the Caribbean do. But the recommendations that Senator Vera would espouse upon with the panel that came from the floor to improve and add to the sport policy is critical. And those recommendations came from not just the speakers and the persons who contributed here, but from you all. And it's intended that this document will be produced, given to Sport TT, our partners, because without Sport TT, we couldn't bring this together. We have very limited resources in government, and we try to be creative to continue to have these programs. So in the Trinidad and Tobago sports policy, in the 2 minutes I have, it talks about the evolution and growth of our nation and its citizens. Public and private sector collaboration is critical going forward. So for instance, if Kavish goes to other slides, like naming rights, you see in the US and other areas, you now have naming rights for stadia. The Jean Pierre complex, I had the misfortune at time to try to run up the stairs in a CrossFit session and not getting any younger, just to be easier. And in one section it's rotten, but there's no money to rehabilitate that part. But think about if we had naming rights. I mean, Jean Pierre is a legend. But suppose if you had like corporate Trinidad and Tobago adopting a community field, not just a big stadium like the Gillette Stadium. I have a slide on it, Kavish will pull up. In Florida, the Gillette Stadium. Because some of us might be corporate giants in the room, but we started off in communities with a field that we have great memories, or in a particular stadia, whether it's the Mahika Oval or wherever. Are we in a position now to adopt that? So naming rights at stadiums is something I think, as we go into the final session, that we have to look at. And this example here of the MetLife Stadium, big company. We have big companies and corporate persons. How do you attract them through policy to really get involved in rehabilitating infrastructure? We're talking about local government reform right now, but we don't have the money to maintain the parks and some of the rivers. So this is the sort of stuff that we have to look at to give back to Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean that we all love. And look at this, the Scotiabank Arena and the money they put in. Trinidad and Tobago has entrepreneurs and businesses that really punches above its weight. Through policy, we could actually now bring the two together and give back to revitalizing sport. Dr. Koo spoke about the gambling industry. This is another way. So as I move to the sporting policies, so what we did, we looked at the Trinidad and Tobago sport policy, we looked at Dubai, and we looked at another country, Singapore, and it's in their sport policies, is imbued in their Vision 2030. We have a similar Vision 2030 in Trinidad and Tobago and many other countries. So future ready through sport, sport without boundaries. Sport as a national language. So you're bringing it down from the primary school level and getting, the youth interested. It's like intellectual property. A lot of people from feedback, intellectual property, what is that? They're scared persons, right? So we have an IP for Kids TT program that we're introducing in the primary school, and we're not going to use that too. We're saying, hey, you could be the next inventor, because we have inherently amazing creative people. So you could be the next creator of something. And it's not only about the traditional subjects. Everybody wants to be a lawyer, a doctor, engineer. So changing the whole conversation is important. I think we might be guilty of using that IP in this, and may have scared one or two people. So we will have to go back and even look at our messaging. So in Dubai in their 2021, achieving a cohesive society and preserved identity through sport, an ambitious plan to increase the UAE's achievements and medals won. So I will close with a video, Kavish?
Of Dubai?
Of Dubai.
Born of a dynamic place that strives to be the best at whatever it does, that celebrates greatness, and that applauds achievement, is Dubai Sports City. From a vision that first began to take shape in 2004, a community based on teamwork, dedication, and passion has risen. Centrally located along the burgeoning Mohammed bin Zayed Road corridor, Dubai Sports City makes the home stretch the most enjoyable part of any day. This 50 million square foot master plan development is the ultimate destination for athletes, fans, and families who strive to achieve success both on and off the field. Whether your quest is for the perfect swing to start your game, the perfect green to finish it, or the perfect pairing for after the game, you'll find it all at Dubai Sports City. For those with high ambitions, this mixed-use development has new spaces and facilities to match, and will give you a head start in the race for the next big deal and help you reach that next level of success. For those times when you simply need to cut loose, when you want to hear the roar of the crowd and marvel at All-Stars, we have the best seats in the house. For those who wish to relax and slow time down, to take it easy and enjoy every precious second. For those times, Dubai Sports City redefines the meaning of the home field advantage. And because we know that finding that elusive item can be as thrilling as any goal or trophy, we cheer on all types of competition and every type of race. For those who strive to break personal records, who train to become the very best, who live for the competition, the moment, the victories, the friendships, and the energy of sport. This is the ultimate destination. Dubai Sports City. Live life the ultimate sport.
Has tremendous money because they diversified. But what do we have? We have a corridor from Tagarigua all the way down to Couva. So while we work to get village cricket and all of these things going, we have this infrastructure feeding Trincity, Couva, San Fernando. You have a hospital in the middle. You have the National Aquatic Center. You have the National Tennis Center. You have the Brian Lara Stadium that's being used for CPL. And we have the potential to brand it around existing partners, the malls, the hospitals, the infrastructures being put to them, as much as that could be a little controversial, it's infrastructure. It's a hotel, other hotels that could be used. So how do we combine it to really look at Trinidad and Tobago being the sporting capital of our region?
Now Reagan asked, what do we have? And for me, I think one of the take-home points throughout this whole 2 days has been connectivity. And so we're at the stage now where we're going to be looking at recommendations. We've heard a lot of the academic stuff. How do we actualize this? And I think in terms of looking at the recommendations, perhaps we might want to look at it from the macro, what government can do on the powers that be, state agencies. From the mid-level, what our sports organizations could do and should do. And at the micro level, what the individual sportsman may need to do. So I think in approaching the various segments, perhaps we could target those sort of universes and try and get something helpful. So I'm going to open the floor and I'm going to ask each of you, starting from Thomas, to, in a few minutes, say what would your principal recommendations be to those who are listening and who would like to leave with something practical.
It gives me some time. Hello? Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. A difficult question. I'm thinking how to answer this and to still look smart, actually. So I think really, as you said, it's not a one-stop shop to support or to further engage. It's really engage at every level. And many stakeholders have to participate, from that one person that performs sports in school. What do they need to advance? What kind of facilities? What kind of support to clubs, to etc. So this is really many aspects that you have to take into account. I'm not sure if I could give one real recommendation to advance. It's just probably get everyone's really feedback, get to the users, what do the athletes need, what do the clubs need, etc., and advance from that side. And then maybe also to some extent don't have a discussion with all of them, but grant everyone their fair share, and for the big aspects find a common denominator, because this probably will be difficult to some aspect, but so that you really support everyone supporting Trinidad and the whole country. This would be my quite German answer, I guess.
Thank you. Gordon, now what I'll say is after this I'm going to ask some specific questions that we can build on. So, but these are just the general observations and recommendations.
Sure. Okay, thank you. The truth is that there are clear areas already that are excelling in a commercial way. So, the cricket has a lot of commercial support now. So maybe you need to look at how the weighting of the funding and the support towards maybe non-traditional sports as well. Jamaica has changed its approach to track and field, and we now much more aware of the value of the field athletes. And I suspect that came after Keyshawn Wallace's performance. Not that we didn't have those athletes who were already trying in the track, in the field side of the events, but we just weren't giving them the type of support we were giving to the sprinters and the middle distance runners, and taking them as seriously. So one of the critical things you can do is to not, I don't want to use the word discriminate, it's a strong, not prefer, is probably the better way to say it. So athletics, football, top sports in Trinidad. Cricket is there, it's not so much Olympic and so on. don't focus just there. There's a school of thought that says in the areas that you're really good at, you're winning at, throw all the resources there so you keep that momentum, you keep winning. I would say no, do it the other way. Build that all around support to all of your sports.
The ecosystem that you described.
The ecosystem is so important because we were speaking earlier, Thomas and myself, and we spoke about the huge impact that the video games and esports is now having, and the use of image rights of teams and of individuals in that area. So my son likes to play Fortnite. And I said, what the hell, I'm playing Fortnite, too much time, go and read. And he's playing, he's young. They had a global tournament this year. The first prize, I think, was $1 million. $1 million. I think the young man who won was 16 or 17. So we need to realize that the world is moving at a certain pace. And that young man today who may be not doing so well as a bowler is probably spending 5 hours on his PlayStation at home. And he may be the new rising star in esports. All right, and I think that's really important for us to just support everything because you don't know where your next star is. And Trinidad and Tobago, your republic in the Caribbean, which is a lot to speak of, and you're Trinidad and Tobago. You're inclusive. It's two of you making one. Now Trinbago, right? So include all of your sports.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I add one aspect? Just from my personal experience, what I found really frustrating, I was playing semi-professional basketball in Germany, and I found it so frustrating that basically I had to go to a club to properly play. At school there was no real interest. It's different than the American high school system. And I found that, example, on a weekend if I wanted to play, there's many schools that have their facilities, but as a private person there's no possibility to enter because of insurance reasons, etc. And I really found that frustrating in school. That's been said, you should go to a math class, you shouldn't shoot hoops, you shouldn't do sports. My personal experience in Germany. In the US, when I was in high school, they had golf courses and everything in a high school, which I've never seen before. So maybe this is really long term, but maybe for everyone who wants to do sports, it's important that they know they're supported in school, etc. And if they want to play, they can. And it's not something I want to practice, but I don't have the ability. Just as a thought.
Thank you. Mr. Ramlal.
Yeah, okay, so my thoughts are along the line of IP, and we need to focus on what are the IP issues that are stifling innovation in sports. We need to find out that what are the intellectual property issues that are stifling innovation in sports, and we need to find out at 3 levels, as Senator Vera rightly says, at the national level, at the industry level, and at the firm level. Why are the firms not innovating? Why are industry not innovating? Why doesn't government have the right policy in place that would support innovation in the sports industry? And as Thomas rightly said, and he was pointing towards it, I think we need to have consultation of all the critical stakeholders in all the sports ecosystem to find out that why is sports not innovating? What is stifling it? What do we need to put in place by way of policy, strategy, and action plan? And once we begin to get that out, then we'll fix the programs and the projects and be surgical and use the scarce resources appropriately and attend to those ecosystems from which we could get an early win. So it speaks to the sports ministry reviewing the policy, addressing the IP issues. It speaks to the firm, the individual companies like Sport TT, looking into their business plan and see how they treat with the IP issues. And it also speaks to the national infrastructure like the IP office to find out, business development company, the IP, the policing and judiciary, to see if they're providing the right services to support innovation in the sporting industry. So this conversation doesn't end here. It now begins. So the recommendation is that we have to meet again with the critical stakeholders of all the ecosystem of the sport industry and start to talk the talk to find out what is stifling it and what we need to do. We will need some assistance from WIPO to send consultants to help diagnose it and to validate the recommendation with modern principles and theories. But that will take some time. But in the short term, what is happening is that these companies are expending resources. They are doing something. And we need to put a capability in place. This is the now strategy to enable them, like Sports TT, to embrace the intellectual property and not leave it idle. So we may very well want to start with an education, information, and training program in intellectual property. So the way we're going to go is like this. And this is the first recommendation that is coming out. The Intellectual Property Office sought technical assistance from WIPO to set up an intellectual property training center with cooperation from UTT, UWI, and Kariri. The National Intellectual Property Training Center will run two broad categories of courses. One is 3-credit courses for the university students to create the workers in the industry. And the next is professional development courses that would address the issue, the IP issue that we face in industry and society. So Sports TT need to work with us as a client of professional development courses from which we could start the training and for which Sports TT would be required and other sports entities as well to make a contribution.
Thank you. So takeaway here is, one recommendation is there's an IP academy in Trinidad and Tobago. That's going to be a great resource. You can use it. And through that IP academy, you'll be accessing information from the experts, from WIPO, and from our universities. Thank you. Karen.
I think Mr. Ramlal said everything I was going to say. Outside of the IP Academy, no, but really though, I think one of the recommendations really would be for us to continue the dialogue. I mean, even in the planning of this event, I told Reagan, I said, listen, we're going to have some quality speakers. It's going to be a great event. Let's just make sure it happens, but it can't stop there. You alluded to, in terms of a strategy and an action plan, and I agree. In terms of identifying the different levels, we definitely need to close the loop, right? Sport company, it would be or is a partner in this entire drive. I think also in terms of the recommendations, so just agreeing with what you're saying as that being a recommendation, definitely just to continue the conversation and sport company establishing itself as a major stakeholder in the whole IP thrust. I think another recommendation would be for us to really identify, even coming out of this initial discussion, what are some of the things that we could put into action right away. One of the key things I remembered coming from Thomas, one of your presentations, I think I asked you the question with regards to the data. And, you know, I think the Caribbean, we have a unique advantage or competitive advantage in terms of our athletes. And I feel like that data would be at a premium for any entity, right? So maybe that is something that we could look at. Sport company would be happy to assist, and at least in terms of having that conversation, because I could see, you know, Garmin or Fitbit or whoever wanted to find out what makes the Caribbean athlete tick. Because we go to the Olympics and you'll see, you know, Braylon Taplin and whoever from Grenada. You'll see all these Trinidadians doing well. You'll see these Jamaicans doing well, and we are a whopping 10-point-something million collectively. So I think we definitely have an opportunity where that is concerned to you know, start leveraging our intellectual property just by virtue of our genetic makeup, our collective genetic makeup, even if we look at cricket and so on. So I think one of the things, one of the key recommendations we could do is kind of deconstruct and analyze some of the contributions, the presentations, and then saying, okay, cool, this is something that we could do. I don't use the word low-hanging fruit, but this is something that we could start enacting right away, at least having the conversation to collect the data, and then having the IP office, maybe calling Thomas, maybe calling Roderick again to say, well, this is what we are thinking. How do we write that initial letter to Garmin to say, hey, we are offering you this, how much you want to pay us, so that we could start monetizing our IP.
I've been a sports person my entire life. But I grew up in a structure where either you play sport or you go to school. So I have seen that structure changed, especially internationally. And we understand now, to be a professional athlete, and we see it with the American structure, that they pulled in NFL players from college. And for you to be in NFL, You need to have good grades at high school to get your scholarship. So that means sport and academic need to go hand in hand. And then we see in the marketing terms, you add tourism. So you have education sector, the sport and tourism. And then you have a play on marketing and sales from your products. And then endorsement deals through marketing, through broadcasting. And an entirely new structure can be set up in such a way that everybody mutually benefits with respect to education, tourism, and the sport industry. And then you have investments. And yesterday I put up a little bit of the structure that has layers of function and then has chains of how you bring international investments in. Your organizational chain that takes care of how it is run. And then you have the marketing and sales chain that incorporates the public and sales that could set up a sustainable ecosystem. And then you have the fourth chain that needs to give back socially in developmental programs.